Everyone is wrong about the moon landing. This major event that most people consider to be a shining example of American ingenuity was actually pulled off by a secret group of Nazi rocket scientists who were funded by the CIA and operated at the highest levels inside the American space program. This guy right here, who was literally the face of NASA on US television throughout the 1950s and 60s, he was a Nazi. That might sound like a conspiracy, but sometimes history is even stranger than you think. Germany in the early 20th century was an emerging hotbed of scientific curiosity and engineering talent, but it was also a nation consumed by fallout from the First World War and gripped by an internal conflict that would provide the breeding ground for a sinister new evil. Caught up in the middle of it all was a young man named Wernher von Braun. Born in 1912, he quickly developed an obsession with rockets and spaceflight. As a teenager, von Braun studied a book called The Rocket into Interplanetary Space. It was written by a fellow German engineer, Hermann Oberth. The text outlined the basic equations of rocket science and discussed the feasibility of human spaceflight. At the age of 17, von Braun's obsession led him into conducting his own primitive rocket experiments, like strapping fireworks to a toy wagon and blasting off through the streets of Berlin. In the 1930s, von Braun joined a group called the Society for Space Travel, essentially a bunch of amateur rocketeers messing around with liquid-fueled rockets and trying to replicate the ideas from Oberth's book. In that small window of time between World War I and World War II, rocket science was more like a science fiction dream than a military tool. But Germany was on the edge of a violent change that would put von Braun and his colleagues at the heart of a new arms race. In 1933, Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party rose to power. He quickly established a totalitarian rule banning all other political parties, putting the unemployed to work in public programs, and rebuilding the German army. In the process, the Nazis began dispatching all Jews, communists, and perceived outsiders to concentration camps. Knowing that an all-out war with the European continent was soon to come, Hitler saw the potential in rocket technology as a weapon to give him the military edge. Von Braun and his rocket society were recruited into the German army, and his first order would be to transform his dreams of spaceflight into weapons of mass destruction. Now, could they have refused Hitler's call? Of course. But what would the consequences of denying the Nazi army have been? At this point, World War II was still 6 years away. Outside of Hitler's inner circle, there would have been no way to know just how far the warpath would lead. But for von Braun and his colleagues, their dreams had been made reality. Unlimited resources at their disposal to develop and build the first rocket in the world that would be capable of reaching outer space. The Aggregate 1 was von Braun's first crack at a liquid-fueled rocket. Built in 1933 at a military test site south of Berlin, it was small but mighty. During a 1934 test, the A-1 exploded on the pad, nearly killing von Braun and his small team. He later remarked, "Well, at least we know it has energy." That would be von Braun's first brush with death, but far from his last. He was learning the kinds of lessons that are only taught by going to the edge of disaster. The A2 was von Braun's rebound, bigger, more powerful, and much less explosive. Two A2s nicknamed Max and Moritz after a German comic strip launched in December 1934, hitting 1.4 miles altitude, a small step, but proof that their concept was working. By 1937, von Braun was technical director at a state-of-the-art Nazi rocket testing complex on Germany's Baltic coast. His team was given unlimited resources to complete their mission, transforming rockets into weapons. This was no side project for Hitler. He saw rockets as a way to bypass traditional warfare and strike at enemies from hundreds of miles away with no need for planes or soldiers. By October 3, 1942, von Braun's completed design was ready for flight. The V2, short for Vengeance Weapon 2. The biggest and most powerful rocket yet, it would become the first man-made object to touch outer space. After that first launch, von Braun toasted his team, saying, "Today, the spaceship is born." By 1943, Allied intelligence had learned of the V2 development and launched a campaign to bring von Braun's work to an end. Operation Hydra bombed the Nazi rocket site, killing 700 people, soldiers and rocket scientists. Yet again, von Braun had escaped death. As he salvaged blueprints from rubble, he told his colleagues, "They can't bomb the idea." Now, this event marks a bit of a turning point in von Braun's story. Up until now, he could easily be perceived as a humble rocket scientist caught up in a war that he didn't start and put to work by an authoritarian government with no other option but to serve the Nazis or die. If you remove the war from the equation, von Braun and his colleagues were living their dream, turning Oberth's text on rockets into reality, finishing the work they had begun as teenagers. But the human cost of the V2 was about to become crystal clear to von Braun, and this is where we begin to see the true measure of the man. With their first rocket testing site destroyed, the Nazis worked quickly to establish the next V2 production site housed inside a massive network of underground tunnels, invisible to the enemy. And hidden from plain sight, the brutality of the Nazi regime became clear. They imported 60,000 prisoners from concentration camps to perform slave labor in horrific conditions deep underground. Many of them were worked to death. And von Braun was well aware of the conditions in his rocket factory. By this point, late into the war, von Braun had risen through the ranks of the Nazi SS, the most elite regime of Hitler's political soldiers. And as a senior official in the Nazi Party, he had toured the V2 facility and overseen the work being done there. He knew that enslaved people were dying to build his rockets, and he knew that the rockets they were building were killing even more. Over 3,000 V2 missiles were used to bomb Allied cities across the UK, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. The rocket bombardment lasted just 6 months, from October 1944 until major combat had ended in March 1945. The result was over 9,000 deaths, most of them civilians. As horrific as that number is, there were even more deaths behind the production of the rocket. Of the 60,000 prisoners at the concentration camp responsible for V2 manufacturing, 20,000 of them had died by the end of the war. Von Braun saw Germany's collapse coming, and he had no interest in going down alongside his Nazi comrades. Von Braun's true loyalty was never to his Führer, it was to his rocket. In April 1945, he and his core team of about 120 engineers fled south, hiding V2 blueprints and parts in mine shafts as they left. On May 2nd, they surrendered to the US Army near Bavaria. Von Braun made sure to tell the Americans exactly who he was. He was pitching himself and his men as being much more valuable as government assets than prisoners of war. The V2 rocket had already proven its deadly potential. London and Antwerp had been pummeled by these missiles, and both the US and the Soviet Union knew this technology would shape the post-war world. Enter Operation Paperclip, a covert US program run by the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, basically the CIA with a longer name. Their objective was to recruit high-value German scientists, engineers, and technicians. The name Paperclip comes from the literal paperclips used to attach new sanitized documents to the personal files of these recruits, covering up their Nazi affiliations. Von Braun's group was Paperclip's crown jewel. By September 1945, he and his key lieutenants had safely arrived in the United States. They brought 100 disassembled V2s and stacks of blueprint documents along with them. This would essentially become the DNA of the American space program. Now, the ethics of Paperclip are a minefield. Von Braun had not only been a Nazi Party member, he was a senior official in the SS who had been directly responsible for thousands of civilian deaths. The CIA knew about all of this, but waved it off and did their best to hide the truth from everyone, even the US government. President Truman's official policy barred active Nazis from working in the United States, so paperclip operatives scrubbed records, faked backgrounds, and pushed the narrative that these were apolitical scientists vital to national security. The first phase of the transfer was the literal replication of Nazi rockets in the USA. At White Sands, New Mexico, starting in 1946, von Braun's team reassembled and launched over 70 captured V-2s. But these weren't weapons anymore, they were test beds. The US strapped scientific instruments onto the rockets, like cameras and atmospheric sensors hitting altitudes over 100 miles. One famous launch in 1946 filmed the Earth from space for the first time. The grainy black and white footage was proof of what rockets could do beyond war. Without paperclip, that expertise might have been lost to the Soviets or scattered in post-war chaos. Instead, by 1950, von Braun's crew landed in Huntsville, Alabama, working for the Army and laying the groundwork for what would become NASA's rocket program. Their early projects, like the Redstone rocket, which launched America's first satellite in 1958, proved the V-2's DNA could scale up and shift from war to space. This set the stage for the Cold War pivot. The Soviets had already begun flexing their own rocket muscle. Thanks to their own captured German scientists, the Soviets struck first by using their new rocket booster to launch a satellite into orbit for the first time. NASA itself is the next link, born directly from this post-war space, founded on July 29, 1958. Amid the Cold War panic after Sputnik, NASA absorbed von Braun's team and their evolving rocket technology. Von Braun became director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center in 1960. He was tasked with building something massive, something that would deliver the United States a definitive and unmatchable win in the space race. NASA needed a monster rocket booster to put men on the moon. This is what von Braun had been dreaming of since his days as a young man on the rocket testing fields before the war. Back in 1945, as he surrendered to the US, von Braun told his brother Magnus, "We knew we'd build a rocket that could go to the moon. We just needed someone to let us try." This was the motivation behind everything he had done. The Nazis, the SS, the bombings, the concentration camp, the countless deaths. You could call von Braun a murderer, and you would not be wrong, but he was more complex than that. In his heart, he was truly a mad scientist. He was going to build the greatest rocket the world had ever seen or ever would see, and he would sacrifice anything and anyone to build that rocket. To him, no price was too high. Operation Paperclip had finally delivered an opportunity to reach the moon, and von Braun was ready to seize it. He pitched NASA officials on a colossal rocket the size of a skyscraper, the power of 1,000 freight trains, named after Saturn, the Roman god of wealth and abundance. Now enter President John F. Kennedy Jr. On May 25, 1961, he stood before Congress and declared, "I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth." This was not a random dream. It was a calculated escalation of the space race. Kennedy's ambition leaned on NASA's readiness, which rested on von Braun and his team of former Nazis. Kennedy's speech was the moment von Braun had been waiting for. The deadline to reach the moon before 1970 gave him permission to be ruthless again, just like he had been during the war. A year later, during the build-up to the Cuban Missile Crisis, JFK toured NASA's rocket factory in Huntsville, where von Braun showcased a Saturn I, the precursor to his moon rocket. Von Braun told JFK, "This is the down payment. Saturn V is the mortgage." The president replied, "I'm betting the farm on you." Kennedy would not live to see the development of the Apollo program, but von Braun would fight relentlessly to keep the president's dream alive. The development of the Saturn V moon rocket was no easy task. It demanded resources from all across the United States. Putting together something of that size, with that amount of power and making it safe enough for human beings to ride, was engineering on a scale the world had never known. When engines exploded during testing, when fuel tanks cracked and broke under pressure, von Braun was there for every step, offering solutions that he'd learned through years of trial and error under the pressures of war. Perhaps von Braun's boldest contribution to Saturn V development was his insistence on all-up testing, meaning that instead of thoroughly ground testing each of the rocket's 3 stages before bringing them together, von Braun pushed NASA to move straight into the real thing, stack the rocket, light it up, and just see what happens. NASA pushed back, but von Braun argued that JFK's 1969 deadline demanded speed. In a heated argument with NASA officials, von Braun told them, "In the war, we flew rockets before we understood them fully. This is no different." And he was right. On November 9, 1967, the Saturn V roared to life for the first time, shaking windows 50 miles away from the launch pad, and it worked perfectly. Not every Saturn V mission was flawless, but out of 13 launches, they all got their crew into space and back again. 6 of those rockets landed men on the moon. Von Braun didn't stick around at NASA once the Apollo program had reached its end. Budget cuts at the agency and a change in priorities was enough for him to lose interest. Von Braun wanted to follow up the moon landing by sending people to the planet Mars. NASA wanted to build a shuttle that would never leave the Earth's orbit. Wernher von Braun retired in 1972. A couple of years later, his health began to fail, and by 1977, he was dead from cancer at the age of 65. Not to get too cliche here, but you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. Von Braun managed to end his life somewhere in between. He was not a good guy, but he did some good things. Probably one of the better examples of the true complexity of human beings.